countertops look even more depressing than usual. Lena Hart moved through the space with practiced invisibility, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates while existing in that peculiar state of being seen but not noticed, exactly how she preferred it these days. 3 years ago, she'd been different. 3 years ago, she'd had savings, plans, and the dangerous belief that love could rescue her from the mundane reality of working-class existence. Then she'd met Ryan Castellano, with his easy charm and expensive cologne, his promises of a better life, and his slow, methodical destruction of everything she'd built. Now at 28, Lena had perfected the art of smallness. She wore her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, no makeup to draw attention, clothes deliberately chosen to be forgettable. She'd learned that beauty was a liability, that being noticed meant being vulnerable, that the safest way to exist was to become a shadow. "Coffee, hun?" She kept her voice neutral, her smile professional but distant, as she approached the trucker who'd been nursing the same cup for an hour. He grunted affirmation without looking up from his phone, and she poured with the mechanical precision of someone who'd performed this action 10,000 times. The November rain hammered against the diner's windows, turning the street outside into a blur of headlights and neon reflections. It was nearly midnight on a Tuesday, the dead zone between the dinner rush and the pre-dawn crowd of insomniacs and third-shift workers. Lena preferred these quiet hours. Fewer customers meant fewer opportunities for things to go wrong, for men to get handsy or demanding, for her carefully constructed invisibility to fail. "Order up," Eddie's gravelly voice called from the kitchen window. The night cook was 70 if he was a day, with hands scarred from decades of burns and cuts, but he was kind in the way of people who'd seen too much hardship to waste energy on cruelty. Lena retrieved the plate, meatloaf special, extra gravy, and delivered it to the businessman in booth 7 who'd been typing furiously on his laptop for the past 2 hours. He barely acknowledged her existence, which was exactly what she wanted. She was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door chimed. Her body tensed automatically. Late-night arrivals always set her on edge, a learned response from too many encounters with drunk men who thought a waitress's smile was an invitation. But the man who stepped through the door made every other late-night customer she'd ever served look like background extras. He was tall, at least 6'2", with the kind of presence that seemed to bend the air around him. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, expensive enough that Lena could see the quality even from across the room. Dark hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and controlled intensity, and eyes so dark they appeared black in the diner's harsh lighting. He wasn't handsome in any conventional sense. His features were too severe, too predatory for that. But he was magnetic in a way that made Lena's survival instincts scream warnings she couldn't quite articulate. The stranger paused just inside the doorway, water beading on the shoulders of his immaculate suit, and surveyed the diner with the calm assessment of someone evaluating a battlefield. His gaze swept over the trucker, the businessman, Eddie visible through the kitchen window, and finally landed on Lena. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. His eyes weren't just looking at her, they were reading her, cataloging details, seeing past the careful invisibility she'd cultivated. Then, his expression shifted into something that might have been professional courtesy, and he moved toward the counter with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "Coffee," he said, his voice low and precise, with the faintest trace of an accent she couldn't place. "Black." "Of course." Lena's hands were steady as she poured, years of practice overriding her discomfort. She set the cup in front of him, careful not to let their fingers touch. "Anything else?" "Not yet." He lifted the cup, inhaled the steam, and took a sip without wincing at the temperature that would have scalded most people. "Quiet night." It wasn't a question, but Lena nodded anyway. "Usually is, this time of night." "You work late shifts often." The question felt loaded somehow, though she couldn't say why. 5 nights a week. Someone's got to." Something flickered in those dark eyes, recognition, maybe, or understanding. "Necessary work. Honest work." He took another sip. Underappreciated. Lena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. She'd learned that silence was often the safest response, that words had a way of revealing too much, creating connections she couldn't afford. The stranger seemed content with her silence. He drank his coffee with the same precise attention he gave everything else, and Lena retreated to the far end of the counter, ostensibly to organize the napkin dispensers, but really to put distance between herself and the unsettling intensity of his presence. 20 minutes passed in relative quiet. The trucker left, dropping a $5 bill on the table without a word. The businessman packed up his laptop and departed into the rain. Eddie disappeared into the back for his smoke break, leaving Lena alone in the front of the diner with only the stranger for company. That's when the bell chimed again, and Lena's carefully controlled world began to collapse. Ryan Castellano stumbled through the door, drunk and rain-soaked, his expensive shirt untucked and his eyes bloodshot. 3 years since she'd last seen him, but Lena would have recognized him anywhere. The man who'd promised her everything and taken even more, who'd drained her savings account and convinced her it was love, who'd left her with nothing but debt and the crushing certainty that she deserved exactly what she got. Well, Ryan's words slurred together as he spotted her. If it isn't my favorite mistake. Lena's throat closed. Every muscle in her body locked down, freeze response overwhelming fight or flight. She'd played this scenario out in her head 1,000 times, imagined what she'd say if she ever saw him again, how she'd prove she'd moved on and grown stronger. But faced with the reality of him, she felt herself shrinking back into the terrified, desperate woman she'd been when he'd finally discarded her. Ryan? Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. You should go. Should I? He lurched toward the counter, knocking into a stool and sending it clattering. This is a public place, sweetheart. I got every right to be here. His gaze raked over her uniform, her lack of makeup, her obvious exhaustion. Jesus, look at you. I always said you'd end up nowhere, didn't I? Said you weren't worth the effort. Ryan, please. You know what's funny? He leaned across the counter, bringing with him the stench of whiskey and cigarettes. I saw Jenny Morrison last week. Remember her? She's a lawyer now, making 6 figures. But I chose you instead. Wasted 3 years on someone who couldn't even keep herself together after I left. The words hit like physical blows, each one finding the soft places where Lena's self-worth was already bruised and tender. She wanted to defend herself, to tell him that she'd rebuilt from the ruins he'd left, that surviving his cruelty was its own kind of victory. But the words wouldn't come. That's enough. The stranger's voice cut through Ryan's tirade with surgical precision. Ryan spun around, taking in the man in the expensive suit with the belligerent aggression of someone too drunk to recognize danger. The fuck are you? Her new boyfriend? He laughed, harsh and mocking. Good luck with that, buddy. She's got nothing to offer. Trust me. I tried everything to make something out of her, but you can't polish a... I said enough. The stranger stood slowly, unfolding from the stool with deliberate grace. He wasn't shouting. His voice hadn't even risen above conversational volume, but something in his tone made the air feel heavier, charged with barely restrained violence. Ryan seemed to sense it too because his bravado faltered. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. I'm just having a conversation with an old friend. No. The stranger stepped around the counter with fluid economy of motion. You're verbally assaulting a woman who wants you to leave. There's a distinction. She's nothing, Ryan spat, courage returning with chemical assistance. She's a nobody waitress who couldn't... The stranger moved so fast that Lena almost missed it. One moment Ryan was standing, sneering and drunk. The next he was on his knees, his arm twisted at an angle that made Lena wince, the stranger's hand wrapped around his wrist with casual, terrifying control. Listen carefully, the stranger said, his voice perfectly calm. You're going to walk out of here. You're going to forget this diner exists. And you're never going to speak to or about this woman again. Are we clear? Ryan's face had gone white with pain and sudden, sobering fear. Who the fuck are you? Someone you don't want to know. The stranger applied slightly more pressure, and Ryan whimpered. Clear? Yes, clear, Jesus. The stranger released him. Ryan scrambled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste to reach the door. At the threshold, he turned back, some final spark of vindictiveness overriding his self-preservation. You deserve each other, he snarled at Lena. You always were attracted to the wrong kind of men. Hope this one destroys you the way I should have. Then he was gone, the door slamming behind him, leaving only the echo of his cruelty and the sound of rain against glass. Lena stood frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles had gone white. She could feel the stranger's eyes on her, but she couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. Shame burned hot in her chest. Shame that he'd witnessed her humiliation, that she'd been so pathetically unable to defend herself, that even after 3 years she was still the broken thing Ryan had created. "Are you all right?" The stranger's voice had gentled, though it still carried that undercurrent of absolute certainty. "I'm fine." The lie tasted bitter. "Thank you for... You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He moved back to his stool, giving her space, and picked up his coffee cup as though nothing unusual had happened. "How long?" "What?" "How long since you left him?" Lena's breath caught. "How did you know I left him?" "Because if he'd left you, he wouldn't have bothered coming here to remind you of it. Men like that need to win. You leaving would have been a loss." He took a sip of coffee. 3 years? Almost 3. She forced her hands to release the counter, to smooth down her apron, to perform the small rituals of normalcy, even as her world felt tilted on its axis. "How could you tell?" "The way you reacted. Recent enough to still hurt. Distant enough that you've built defenses." His dark eyes studied her with that same unsettling intensity. "He's wrong, by the way." "About what?" "All of it. But particularly about you being nothing." The stranger set down his cup with precise care. "You survived someone who actively tried to destroy you. That's not nothing. That's extraordinary." Lena felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking, but opening, like ice thawing after a long winter. She didn't know this man, had no reason to trust his assessment of her worth, but something in the way he said it with such absolute certainty made her want to believe him. "You don't know me," she said quietly. "You don't know what I've done, what I've lost." "I know enough." He pulled out his wallet and placed a $100 bill on the counter. "For the coffee and the inconvenience." "That's too much. It's not nearly enough." He stood, adjusting his cuffs with practiced precision. "Lena Hart. That's your name, yes?" She nodded, unsurprised that he knew. Men like him always knew things they shouldn't. "My name is Marco DeLuca." He extended his hand across the counter. "And I think we should talk." Lena stared at the offered hand, her mind racing. She knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name, even people like her who lived in the invisible spaces between legitimate society and the criminal underworld. Marco DeLuca, the man they whispered about in careful tones, the one who controlled half the city's business, legal and otherwise. The one you didn't cross, didn't refuse, didn't even look at wrong if you valued your continued existence. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you want to talk to me?" "Because you're in danger." Marco's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. That man who just left, he's not going to stay away. Men like him never do. They come back and they escalate, and they take what they believe they're owed. "He's just drunk and bitter. He'll forget about me by morning." "Will he?" Marco tilted his head slightly. "Is that what you truly believe, or what you need to believe to keep functioning?" Lena wanted to argue, to insist he was wrong, to maintain the fiction that her carefully invisible life was protection enough. But she couldn't. Because even as Ryan had stumbled out the door, she'd seen something in his eyes that terrified her, a dark promise that this wasn't over, that he wasn't done punishing her for having the audacity to survive without him. "What do you want from me?" she asked instead. "Right now?" "Nothing. I want you to finish your shift, go home safely, and think about whether you want to keep living in fear." Marco pulled a business card from his inner pocket and placed it on the counter next to the money. "When you're ready to discuss alternatives, call that number." "Alternatives to what?" "To being invisible, to being afraid, to letting men like him dictate the shape of your life." Marco's gaze held hers, steady and unwavering. "You think you're safe in the shadows, Lena, but shadows have a way of deepening until they swallow everything whole. Sometimes the only way out is to step into the light, even if that light comes from dangerous places." He moved toward the door, his footsteps silent on the worn linoleum. "Mr. DeLuca," Lena called out, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "Why do you care? You don't know me." Marco paused, his hand on the door handle, and looked back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Let's just say I recognize someone being backed into a corner, and I've learned that cornered things either die or discover they have teeth. He smiled, and it was a predator's smile, beautiful and terrible. I'm curious to see which you'll be. Then he was gone, disappearing into the rain and the night, leaving behind only his card, his money, and the unsettling certainty that Lena Hart's invisible life had just become very, very visible to exactly the wrong kind of man. Or perhaps, she thought, as she picked up the card with trembling fingers, exactly the right kind. Eddie emerged from the back, cigarette smoke clinging to his uniform. Everything okay out here? Thought I heard some commotion. Everything's fine, Lena lied, slipping the card into her apron pocket. Just a difficult customer. The drunk guy or the one in the suit? Both, neither. She grabbed a rag and began wiping down the already clean counter, needing the familiar motion to ground herself. Eddie, have you ever felt like your whole life was about to change, but you couldn't tell if it was going to be better or worse? The old cook studied her with eyes that had seen too much of the world's cruelty to be shocked by any of it. Every damn day, kid. Every damn day. He scratched his stubbled chin. Though usually that feeling comes before something breaks, not after. You in some kind of trouble? I don't know, Lena admitted. Maybe. Or maybe I've been in trouble for years and I'm just now realizing it. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of routine tasks performed on autopilot while her mind churned through impossible scenarios. Marco DeLuca had noticed her. Marco DeLuca thought she was in danger. Marco DeLuca had given her his personal number and an invitation to discuss alternatives to her current life. Every reasonable instinct told her to throw away the card, forget the whole encounter, pretend that tonight had been nothing more than a strange interruption in her carefully controlled existence. Marco DeLuca was dangerous. Not in the way Ryan had been dangerous, with his emotional manipulation and gradual destruction of her sense of self, but in a way that was somehow both more honest and more terrifying. But as she locked up the diner at 4 in the morning and began her walk home through streets that suddenly felt more menacing than usual, Lena couldn't stop her hand from checking her apron pocket, confirming that the card was still there. Her apartment was a studio in a building that had been condemned twice and somehow remained standing through bureaucratic oversight and slumlord determination. The lock stuck, as always, requiring her to jiggle the key in a specific pattern she'd learned through trial and error. The radiator clanked and hissed, providing just enough heat to keep the place from being actively uninhabitable. Lena had lived here for 2 years, ever since she'd finally escaped Ryan's apartment with nothing but the clothes on her back and the crushing weight of debt he'd accumulated in her name. It wasn't much, but it was hers. No one could take it from her. No one could use it to control her. She dropped her keys in the chipped bowl by the door, a garage sale find that had cost 50 cents, and peeled off her uniform, which smelled like grease and coffee and other people's lives. In the shower, under water that never got quite hot enough, she let herself examine the bruise already forming on her hip where Ryan had shoved her against the counter. Small price, she told herself. It could have been so much worse. It had been so much worse. In the past, during their relationship, when his cruelty had occasionally turned physical. At least this time someone had intervened. At least this time she hadn't been alone. Wrapped in her threadbare robe, Lena made herself a cup of tea and sat on the edge of her bed, which was also her couch, her dining room, and her office, and pulled out Marco's card. The card stock was heavy, expensive. No company name, no title, just a phone number embossed in silver against matte black, and in small letters at the bottom, for Lena Hart only. He'd had this made specifically for her, which meant he'd known he was going to approach her tonight, had planned for it, had prepared. The implications made her head spin. What could a man like Marco DeLuca possibly want with someone like her? She had nothing he could use, no money, no connections, no information worth trading. She was exactly what Ryan had called her, a nobody waitress clinging to the edge of survival. Except Marco had said she was extraordinary, had looked at her like she was something other than forgettable, had defended her with a casual violence that suggested he did such things often and well. Lena's phone buzzed, making her jump. A text from an unknown number. You made it home safely. Good. Sleep if you can. Call when you're ready to stop running. Her hands shook as she typed back. How did you get my number? The response came immediately. The same way I know Ryan Castellano has a history of violence against women. The same way I know he's been fired from 3 jobs in the past year. The same way I know he's desperate, angry, and fixated on punishing you for leaving him. I make it my business to know things, Lena, especially things that might matter. You're scaring me. A longer pause this time. Then, I know. I'm sorry for that. But you should be scared. Just not of me. Never of me. Lena stared at the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every rational thought told her to block the number, throw away the card, pretend tonight had never happened. But rationality had never protected her before. Rationality had told her Ryan loved her, that his jealousy was passion, that she just needed to try harder to make him happy. Maybe it was time to stop being rational. Maybe it was time to be something else entirely. She typed carefully, "What kind of alternatives?" The response came with an attachment, a photo of Ryan's car, parked outside a bar she recognized, time-stamped from 15 minutes ago. And a message, the kind that ensure you never have to be afraid again, the kind that give you power instead of just survival, the kind that most people never get offered because they're too invisible to matter. But you're not invisible to me, Lena. You never will be again. Lena set down her phone with shaking hands. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But underneath the fear was something else, something that felt dangerously like hope, like possibility, like the first ray of light after years of darkness. She picked up the phone again and typed 3 words. "I'm listening. When?" "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. I'll send a car. Wear something comfortable. We're going to talk honestly. An honest conversation shouldn't happen in formal clothing." "Where?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere private. Somewhere you can say no and walk away if you choose." A pause, then another message. "I'm not your enemy, Lena. I'm not him. I'm offering you a choice. Perhaps the first real choice you've had in years. What you do with it is entirely up to you." Lena didn't respond. She couldn't because she didn't know what to say. Instead, she set her phone aside, turned off the lights, and lay in the darkness listening to the sounds of the building settling around her. The couple fighting 2 floors up, the baby crying next door, the distant wail of sirens that was as much a part of the city's soundtrack as the rain. She'd spent 3 years making herself invisible, believing that safety lived in the spaces no one looked. But Marco DeLuca had looked, had seen. And now there was no going back to the comfortable fiction of her invisibility, because someone knew she existed, someone dangerous and powerful and strangely gentle in his terrifying certainty. Tomorrow she would put on comfortable clothes and get into a car sent by a man she didn't know, to discuss alternatives she couldn't imagine, and possibly make the second most dangerous decision of her life. The first had been trusting Ryan Castellano. She'd paid for that mistake with 3 years of her life and almost everything she'd built. What would it cost her to trust Marco DeLuca? And more importantly, what would it cost her not to? As sleep finally claimed her, Lena's hand crept to her abdomen, to the place where she'd once carried a secret so heavy it had nearly crushed her. Some scars never fully healed, some choices echoed forever, and some truths, once buried, had a way of clawing their way back to the surface when you least expected them. Tomorrow would bring answers, or it would bring new questions. Either way, Lena Hart's invisible life was over. She just had to hope she survived whatever came next. The black Mercedes arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, idling outside Lena's building with the quiet purr of an engine worth more than everything she owned. She watched it from her window for 5 full minutes, her comfortable jeans and simple sweater suddenly feeling inadequate despite Marco's instructions. The driver was a woman, which surprised her, tall, athletic, with dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail and the kind of posture that suggested military training. Lena's phone buzzed. "Her name is Sophia. She's been with me for 6 years. You're safe with her." Taking a breath that didn't quite steady her nerves, Lena grabbed her jacket and headed down the 4 flights of stairs, each step feeling like a choice she couldn't take back. Sophia opened the rear door without a word, her expression professionally neutral, and Lena slid into leather seats that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. They drove in silence through the city, away from Lena's familiar streets and into neighborhoods where the buildings grew taller and cleaner, where doormen stood at attention and the sidewalks were free of trash. Finally, they pulled into an underground garage beneath a building of glass and steel that stretched toward the sky like a declaration of power. Sophia led her to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. "Penthouse," she said simply, the first word she'd spoken. "Mr. DeLuca is expecting you." The elevator rose with stomach-dropping speed, and Lena watched the numbers climb, 20 floors, 30, 40, until finally it stopped at the top. The doors opened directly into an apartment that made Lena's breath catch. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, the afternoon sun turning the skyline into something almost beautiful. The space was decorated with minimalist precision, dark wood, leather furniture, artwork that looked original and expensive. Everything spoke of wealth, but also of someone who valued quality over ostentation, control over excess. Marco stood near the windows, his back to her, speaking quietly into his phone in what sounded like Italian. He wore dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and even from behind, even in this casual state, he radiated the same contained power that had bent the diner to his presence last night. He ended the call and turned, and Lena was struck again by the severity of his features, the intensity of those dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything they touched. "Lena, thank you for coming." He gestured to the seating area near the windows. "Please sit. Would you like something to drink? Coffee, tea, water?" "Water is fine." Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. Marco poured from a pitcher on the side table, added ice and a slice of lemon without asking, and handed her the glass before taking the chair across from her. Not the couch beside her, the chair, maintaining distance, giving her space. Everything about his body language suggested careful consideration, as though he was aware of his own power and actively working to minimize the threat of it. "I imagine you have questions," he said. "About 1,000. Lena took a sip of water, buying herself a moment. "Starting with why I'm here, why you noticed me, why you care what happens to someone like me." "Someone like you." Marco's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "You keep saying that, as if you've internalized his assessment of your worth." "Ryan wasn't entirely wrong. I'm nobody special. I work in a diner. I live in a building that should have been condemned. I have nothing anyone would want." "You're wrong about that." Marco leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same unsettling intensity. "You have something very rare, the ability to survive systematic destruction and still retain your essential self. Most people break completely. They become what their abusers tell them they are. But you didn't. You're still fighting, still working, still choosing to exist despite everything he did to convince you that you shouldn't." Lena's throat tightened. "That's not strength. That's just stubbornness, not knowing when to quit." "No, it's survival instinct refined into art." Marco set down his own glass with precise care. "I've built my entire enterprise on understanding people, Lena. What motivates them, what breaks them, what makes them useful or dangerous or irrelevant. And you are none of those common things. You're something much more interesting." "Which is?" "Resilient, adaptable, capable of extraordinary loyalty once you decide someone has earned it." He paused. "And completely wasted serving coffee to people who will never see you as anything more than a convenience." The words hit harder than they should have, maybe because they echoed thoughts Lena had been trying not to think for months. "So what are you suggesting? That I quit my job and do what instead?" "That depends on what you want your life to look like." Marco stood and moved to the windows, looking out over the city he reportedly controlled. "Let me tell you what I know about Ryan Castellano. In the past 3 years since you left him, he cycled through 4 more relationships. Each one ended with the woman filing a restraining order. Each one involved escalating violence. The last woman ended up in the hospital with a broken jaw and 3 cracked ribs." Lena's water glass nearly slipped from her fingers. "What?" "He's getting worse, more desperate, more violent. And yesterday when he saw you, saw that you'd survived without him, it triggered something. He spent 2 hours at that bar telling anyone who would listen about how you'd ruined his life, how you owed him for the years he wasted on you, how he was going to make you understand what you'd cost him." The room felt suddenly cold despite the afternoon sun. "You had someone watching him." "I have people watching a lot of things. It's how I stay alive in a business where information is currency." Marco turned to face her. Ryan Castellano is going to come for you, Lena. Maybe this week, maybe next month. But he's going to escalate from verbal abuse to something much worse. And a restraining order won't stop him. The police won't stop him. Your invisibility won't stop him. Then what will? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. Me. Marco's answer was simple, absolute. Or more specifically, a situation where hurting you would have consequences he's not willing to face. Lena stood, needing to move, to think, to process what he was saying. You want to, what? Threaten him? Have your people scare him off? That's a short-term solution. Men like Ryan don't respond to threats. They just get more creative about their revenge. Marco moved closer but stopped a careful distance away. I'm offering you something more permanent, more effective, something that would make you untouchable to him and everyone like him. I don't understand. Marriage. The word dropped into the space between them like a stone into still water. Specifically, marriage to me. Lena stared at him, certain she'd misheard. That's insane. It's practical. Marco's expression didn't change. I need a wife. You need protection. It's a transaction that benefits us both. You need a wife. Lena heard the edge of hysteria in her own laugh. You're Marco DeLuca. You could have anyone. Models, socialites, women who actually belong in your world. Why would you possibly need to marry a diner waitress? Because those women want something from me. Status, money, access to power. They would marry me for what I can give them, which makes them liabilities. They can be bought, threatened, used against me. Marco's gaze held hers steadily. But you don't want those things. You want safety, security, the knowledge that no one will ever hurt you again. That's a motivation I can trust. This is crazy. Lena turned away, her mind reeling. You don't know me. We met yesterday. People don't get married for protection like it's some kind of business arrangement. They do in my world, all the time. Marco's voice was patient, reasonable, as though they were discussing something perfectly ordinary. Let me explain what this would look like. We get married, a legal marriage, properly documented. You move into this apartment or another if you prefer. You receive an allowance that allows you to live comfortably. In return, you attend certain events with me when necessary, maintain the appearance of a legitimate marriage, and most importantly, you become untouchable. Untouchable to who? To Ryan? To everyone. Do you understand what it means to be my wife in this city? It means you're under my protection. It means anyone who harms you has declared war on me. It means you can walk anywhere, live anywhere, exist without fear, because the cost of touching you is too high for anyone to consider. Lena's head was spinning. And what do you get out of this besides a convenient, wife-shaped shield? Legitimacy. Stability. The appearance of a man who has settled down, who has something to protect beyond power and profit. Marco moved to the bar and poured himself a measure of whiskey. I've been building my enterprise for 15 years, Lena. I'm 38 years old, and I've reached a point where the violence that built my reputation has become a liability. I need to transition into legitimacy, legal businesses, political connections, respectability, and a wife is part of that picture. A real wife would be better for that than a fake one. A real wife would require emotional investment I don't have the capacity for. Feelings create vulnerabilities. Attachments become weapons other people can use against you. Marco took a sip of his drink. This arrangement would be clear, transactional, honest, no lies about love, no pretense of romance, just two people helping each other survive in a world that's trying to destroy them both. Lena sank back onto the couch, her legs suddenly unsteady. You're serious. You're actually serious about this. Completely. Marco returned to his chair. I know it's overwhelming. I know it seems impossible. But I need you to think past the initial shock and consider the reality of your situation. You're in danger. Not hypothetical danger. Real, immediate danger from a man who has demonstrated escalating violence. You have no resources to protect yourself, no family to help you, no savings to run with. You're living day to day hoping he'll forget about you, knowing he won't. Everything Marco was saying was true, and that was the most terrifying part. Lena had been living in denial, telling herself that Ryan's appearance at the diner was a fluke, a drunken coincidence that wouldn't repeat. But she'd felt the malice in his eyes, the dark promise that this wasn't finished. "What if I say no?" she asked quietly. "Then you walk out of here, and I never contact you again. Sophia will drive you home. You go back to your life." Marco's expression was unreadable. "But Ryan doesn't disappear. The danger doesn't vanish, and the next time he comes for you, I won't be there to intervene. You could still help me, without the marriage. You could just make him go away." "I could, but it would be temporary. I can't protect someone who isn't mine to protect. It sends the wrong message, creates obligations and debts that complicate other arrangements." Marco leaned forward slightly. "In my world, everything has a structure, a hierarchy, a reason. You can't be a random woman I've decided to shield out of charity. That makes you a weakness, a target. But as my wife, you become an asset, an extension of my power, untouchable by definition." Lena wanted to argue, to find a hole in his logic, but she couldn't. Everything he said made a terrible kind of sense. "How long would this marriage last?" "As long as it needs to. A year, 2 years, 5, until we've both achieved what we need from it. Until you've built yourself a life where you don't need my protection anymore. Until I've established enough legitimacy that I can transition to the next phase of my enterprise." Marco's voice softened slightly. "I'm not trying to own you, Lena. I'm trying to give you space to become whoever you're capable of being without fear holding you back. And if I meet someone, fall in love, want a real marriage, then we dissolve this one, quietly and amicably, and you get a divorce settlement generous enough to start whatever life you want." Marco stood and retrieved a folder from his desk. "I had my lawyer draw up a preliminary agreement. It outlines everything: your allowance, your rights, the terms of dissolution, protections built in to ensure I can't abuse the arrangement." He held out the folder, and after a moment's hesitation, Lena took it. The document inside was thick, dense, with legal language, but even skimming it, she could see he'd been telling the truth. Financial security, personal autonomy, clear exit conditions. It read less like a marriage contract and more like a business partnership with unusual terms. "I can't decide this right now," she said. "This is too big, too strange." "I know." Marco checked his watch. "You have 48 hours. After that, the offer expires. Not because I want to pressure you, but because in 48 hours, certain people will know I've made this offer. If you decline, it creates complications I'd prefer to avoid." "What kind of complications?" "The kind where my enemies see rejected generosity as weakness. The kind where they start looking at you as leverage instead of as protected." His expression was grim. "I'm sorry. I wish I could give you more time, but this world doesn't allow for leisurely decision-making." Lena stood, clutching the folder like a lifeline. "I need to go. I need to think." "Of course." Marco gestured toward the elevator. "Sophia will take you wherever you want to go." "And Lena?" He waited until she met his eyes. "Whatever you decide, be careful. Ryan called the diner 3 times today asking about your schedule. He's fixated, and fixated men are dangerous." The ride back to her building passed in a blur. Sophia dropped her at the curb with the same professional silence, and Lena climbed the stairs to her apartment feeling like she was moving through water, everything slow and surreal. Inside, she spread the contract on her bed and tried to read it properly, but the words kept swimming. Marriage, protection, transaction, 48 hours. Her phone rang, making her jump. Unknown number, but she answered anyway. "Lena, it's Eddie from the diner." Relief flooded through her at the familiar voice. "Eddie? Hi, is everything okay?" "That's what I'm calling to ask you. Some guy's been hanging around outside for the past hour, asking about you. Young guy, expensive clothes, smells like a distillery. Carla told him you weren't working today, but he won't leave. Says he's a friend, but he don't look friendly to me." Ryan. Of course it was Ryan. "Eddie, if he comes back, don't tell him anything about me. Not when I work, not where I live. Nothing." A pause. "You in some kind of trouble, kid?" "I don't know yet. Maybe." Lena pressed her hand to her forehead. "Can you do me a favor? If he shows up again, call the police. Say he's harassing staff, trespassing, whatever. Just get him away from there." "You got it. And Lena, you need somewhere to stay for a while. My sister's got a spare room in Queens. Nothing fancy, but it's safe. Tears burned behind her eyes at the simple kindness. "Thank you, Eddie. I'll let you know." After she hung up, Lena went to her window and looked down at the street. Nothing unusual, just the normal flow of people and traffic, the everyday chaos of the city. But she felt exposed suddenly, visible in a way she hadn't been yesterday. Marco was right. Ryan wasn't going to stop, and she had no way to make him. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Marco. "Eddie called me. I have people watching the diner now. Ryan won't get near it, but he knows where you work, which means he can follow you home eventually. You're running out of time to be invisible." Lena typed back, "How did Eddie get your number?" "I gave it to him this morning, along with a significant bonus for looking out for you. He's a good man. He cares about you. But caring isn't enough to stop what's coming." She stared at the message, at the contract on her bed, at the life she'd built from the ruins Ryan had left her. It wasn't much. A studio apartment, a waitressing job, a handful of co-workers who were kind to her. But it was hers. Choosing Marco meant giving all of that up for something she couldn't predict or control. But staying meant living in fear, waiting for the inevitable moment when Ryan's escalation turned physical, when invisibility failed and she became just another statistic of domestic violence. Lena picked up Marco's business card and stared at the embossed number. 48 hours. 2 days to decide if she trusted a dangerous stranger more than she feared a dangerous ex. 2 days to choose between the devil she knew and the one offering her protection with strings she couldn't fully understand. Her phone rang again. Her actual phone, the number only a handful of people knew. She didn't recognize the caller ID, but something made her answer. Heavy breathing, then Ryan's slurred voice. "Found your number, sweetheart. Wasn't hard. Nothing about you is hard to find. You think you can just move on? Build a new life? You're mine, Lena. You'll always be mine, and I'm going to remind you of that real soon." The call ended, leaving only the sound of her own ragged breathing. Lena's hands shook as she pulled up Marco's contact and typed, "He just called me. Threatened me. How did he get my number?" The response came immediately. "From the diner's employee contact sheet. I'm having it secured now. Where are you?" "Home." "Stay there. Lock your door. I'm sending Sophia to watch your building." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. You're not safe, Lena. And whether you marry me or not, I'm not going to let him hurt you. But my ability to protect you without the marriage is limited. You need to decide if limited protection is enough." Lena set down her phone and walked to her door, checking the flimsy lock that wouldn't stop a determined attack. Then she went to her window and looked down at the street again. This time she saw the black Mercedes parked half a block down, Sophia's silhouette visible in the driver's seat. Marco had said 48 hours, but Lena realized she didn't have that long. Not really, because Ryan had already started his escalation, had already shown his hand, and men like him didn't slow down once they started. They accelerated until they crashed into whatever obstacles stood in their way, and Lena alone was no obstacle at all. She opened the contract again and read it properly this time, forcing herself to focus on every clause, every protection, every promise Marco had made in legal language. It was generous to the point of seeming unreal. She would have her own bank account, her own credit cards, her own life. Just with the shield of his name and protection. She could leave at any time for any reason and walk away with enough money to start over anywhere in the world. The only thing she would owe him was the appearance of legitimacy, public support, the performance of marriage at events and functions. It wasn't love, but it wasn't ownership either. It was exactly what he'd said. A transaction between two people trying to survive impossible circumstances. Lena's phone buzzed. A photo from an unknown number, her apartment building, taken from across the street, with a message, "Miss me yet?" Her blood turned to ice. Ryan wasn't just threatening anymore. He was watching, waiting, closing in. She grabbed her phone and called Marco's number, her decision crystallizing with the clarity of absolute necessity. He answered on the first ring. "Lena, when would the wedding be?" Her voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. A pause, then, "As soon as we can arrange it. 48 hours if necessary. I have contacts who can expedite the paperwork. And I'd be safe. Immediately. The moment the license is filed, you become untouchable. I'd make certain everyone who needs to know understands exactly what you are to me." Marco's voice gentled slightly. "Is he there? Outside your building?" I don't know. He sent a photo. He knows where I live. Sophia's watching. He won't get inside. But Lena, you need to make a choice. I can have her take you to a hotel tonight, keep you safe in the short term. But that's just delaying the inevitable unless you accept my offer. Lena looked around her tiny apartment, at the life she'd scraped together from nothing, at the independence she'd fought so hard to maintain. Marrying Marco meant giving up the fiction that she could survive on her own. But maybe that fiction had always been a lie. Maybe real strength wasn't refusing help. It was knowing when to accept it. I want to see the marriage license paperwork, she said. I want to meet with your lawyer, and I want your promise that if I do this, if I agree to this arrangement, you'll be honest with me about your business, about the risks, about what being your wife actually means. You have my word. Marco's voice carried absolute certainty. Pack a bag. Sophia will bring you here tonight. Tomorrow we'll meet with my lawyer, finalize everything. The day after, we get married. Just like that? Just like that, unless you've changed your mind. Lena closed her eyes and thought about Ryan's threats, about Eddie's worried voice, about 3 years of living in fear and calling it survival. She thought about Marco's dark eyes seeing her when everyone else looked through her, about the careful distance he'd maintained even while offering her everything. I haven't changed my mind, she said. But, Marco, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this because I think you're going to save me. I'm doing this because I'm choosing to save myself, and you're offering me the tools I need to do it. This is my choice. My decision. Don't ever forget that. A low sound that might have been a laugh. I wouldn't dream of it. That's exactly why I chose you, Lena. You're not looking for a hero. You're looking for a weapon. And I can be that for you, if you let me. Then I guess we have a deal. Pack for a few days. Bring anything you can't live without. Everything else can be replaced. Marco's voice shifted into something more businesslike. And Lena, welcome to your new life. It's going to be complicated and strange and probably terrifying, but I promise you, no one will ever make you feel small again. After they hung up, Lena stood in the middle of her apartment and let the enormity of what she'd just agreed to wash over her. In 48 hours, she would be married to a man she barely knew, a man who controlled an empire built on fear and power, a man who'd looked at her and seen not weakness but potential. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was probably the second worst decision she'd ever made. But as she packed her few possessions into a battered duffel bag, as she took one last look at the apartment that had been her sanctuary and her prison, Lena felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. The sense that maybe, just maybe, invisibility wasn't the only way to survive. That maybe being seen could be its own kind of armor, if you were seen by the right person. When Sophia buzzed her intercom 20 minutes later, Lena took one final look around, whispered a quiet goodbye to the woman she'd been, and walked out the door toward whatever came next. The Mercedes was warm and quiet, and Sophia drove with the same professional efficiency as before. But as they merged into traffic, heading toward the gleaming tower that would be Lena's new home, Sophia caught her eye in the rearview mirror. Mr. DeLuca is a good man, she said quietly. Not a safe man, not an easy man, but good in the ways that matter. He'll keep his word to you. How long have you worked for him? 6 years. He saved my life. Sophia's jaw tightened. My ex-husband tried to kill me, beat me so badly the doctor said I'd never walk again. Mr. DeLuca made sure I got the best care, the best physical therapy. Then he made sure my ex-husband understood that touching me again would be the last thing he ever did. Lena leaned forward. Did you marry him too? A soft laugh. No, but he offered, in his way, a different arrangement. Protection in exchange for loyalty, security in exchange for service. I chose to work for him instead, to be his guard, his driver, his shield when he needs one. Sophia's eyes met Lena's in the mirror. There's no shame in accepting help, Mrs. DeLuca, not when it's honestly offered. Mrs. DeLuca. The name sounded foreign, impossible. But as the city lights blurred past and the tower grew closer, Lena realized it was also a kind of armor, a name that meant something in this world of shadows and power, a name that could protect her in ways invisibility never had. She'd spent 3 years being no one. Maybe it was time to see what being someone actually felt like, even if that someone was a lie built on necessity and mutual survival. The Mercedes pulled into the underground garage, and Lena stepped out into her new life with nothing but a duffel bag, a contract, and the strange, terrifying certainty that Marco DeLuca had seen something in her worth protecting. Now she just had to figure out if she could become whoever that woman was supposed to be. The penthouse felt different at night, the city lights turning the windows into a constellation of ambition and wealth that Lena had never imagined being part of. Sophia had shown her to a guest room. Calling it a room was almost insulting given that it was larger than her entire former apartment, and left her with instructions to rest, that Marco would see her in the morning to discuss the legal arrangements. But sleep was impossible. Lena sat on the edge of a bed that probably cost more than she'd earned in the past year and tried to process the fact that in less than 48 hours, she would be married to a man she'd met 3 days ago. A man whose last name carried weight she was only beginning to understand. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and wandered out into the main living space, drawn by the glow of the city through those massive windows. She found Marco there, sitting in the dark with a glass of whiskey, looking out over his domain like a king surveying his kingdom. "Can't sleep either?" His voice was quiet, unsurprised by her presence. "Too much to think about." Lena moved closer but maintained distance, still uncertain of the boundaries of whatever this arrangement was becoming. "Do you do this often? Sit in the dark and drink alone?" "More often than I should." Marco gestured to the seat across from him. "Join me, unless you'd rather be alone." "I've been alone for 3 years. I think I've had enough of it." Lena sat, tucking her legs under her, wearing the same clothes she'd arrived in because everything else felt too presumptuous. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why me? Really? You said I was resilient and loyal and all these things, but you don't actually know that about me. We've had 2 conversations. For all you know, I could be exactly what Ryan said, weak, forgettable, nothing special." Marco took a slow sip of his drink, considering his answer. "Do you know what I do, Lena? My actual business? I know what people say, that you control shipping, distribution, that half the politicians in the city are in your pocket, that people who cross you disappear." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not naive enough to think you made your fortune selling legitimate products." "No, you're not naive. That's part of why I chose you." Marco set down his glass. "I started with nothing. My father was a dock worker who drank himself to death when I was 12. My mother cleaned houses until her hands bled. I watched them break themselves for pennies while the people who employed them lived in places like this. I learned young that the world doesn't reward hard work or kindness. It rewards power. So you took power. I took what I needed to survive. Then I took more because survival alone isn't enough. I built an empire, yes. Some of it clean, much of it not. I've done things I'm not proud of and things that were absolutely necessary, and now I'm at a crossroads." He leaned forward slightly. "I can continue as I have been, accumulating power and enemies in equal measure until someone finally takes me down. Or I can evolve, transition, become legitimate enough that my empire outlasts me. And you need a wife for that. I need the appearance of stability, of having something to lose beyond money and reputation." Marco's eyes held hers. "But more than that, I needed someone who understands what it means to survive." Lena felt something shift in her chest, a recognition she hadn't expected. "You're lonely." "Lonely is too simple a word. I'm isolated by necessity. Trust is a luxury I can't afford in my world. Everyone wants something. Everyone has an agenda. Everyone is either an asset or a threat." Marco's voice carried a weight of years. "But you don't want my power. You just want to be safe. That's honest. That's something I can work with. So this marriage, it's not just protection for me. It's protection for you too. From loneliness. From isolation." "Perhaps." Marco stood and moved to the windows. "Does that change your decision?" "No." Lena surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. "If anything, it makes it easier. I'd rather marry someone who's honest about what they need than someone who pretends this is anything other than what it is. 2 people making a deal that benefits them both." Marco turned back to her, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. You should know what you're walking into. Tomorrow, when we meet with my lawyer, you'll learn details about my business that could be dangerous to know. And the day we marry, you'll become a target for my enemies. They'll look at you as leverage, as a weakness to exploit. But you'll protect me with everything I have. But protection isn't the same as safety. There will be risks, Lena. People who might try to hurt you to get to me. Situations that could be frightening or dangerous. He paused. I want you to understand that before you sign anything. This isn't just a shield against Ryan. It's entry into a world where violence is currency and loyalty is the only thing worth more than money. Lena stood and walked to the windows, looking out over the city that had chewed her up and spit her out more times than she could count. I've been afraid every day for 3 years. Afraid Ryan would come back. Afraid I'd lose my job. Afraid I'd end up homeless or worse. At least with you, I know what I'm afraid of. There's honesty in that. You're braver than you think. I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being afraid. She turned to face him. Tell me about the wedding. What actually happens? We sign the paperwork tomorrow after meeting with my lawyer. The day after, we have a small ceremony, just witnesses, nothing elaborate. You'll sign your name next to mine, and then you become Lena DeLuca. Marco's voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes were intent on hers. After that, we attend a dinner I'm hosting. Business associates, a few political contacts. It's important that they see us together, that they understand our marriage is real, and that you're under my protection. So I perform, play the happy bride. You be yourself, just yourself, standing beside me. That's all I need. Marco moved closer, but still maintained that careful distance. I won't touch you without permission. We'll maintain separate bedrooms unless you prefer otherwise. This marriage is about protection and legitimacy, not romance, I know. Lena wrapped her arms around herself. What if I meet someone someday? Fall in love? Want something real? Then we dissolve this arrangement and you pursue that with my blessing and enough money to build whatever life you want. Marco's answer came without hesitation. I'm not trying to own you, Lena. I'm trying to give you space to become whoever you're meant to be. If that person eventually doesn't need me, that's success, not failure. The sincerity in his voice was almost harder to accept than the transactional nature of their arrangement. Lena had spent so long believing that kindness always came with strings attached, that protection always demanded something in return. But Marco seemed to genuinely mean what he said. This was a partnership, not ownership. I should try to sleep, she said finally. Tomorrow sounds complicated. It will be, but you'll handle it. Marco's mouth curved slightly. You've already handled worse. Lena returned to the guest room, but still couldn't sleep. Instead, she lay in the darkness and thought about the woman she'd been 3 days ago. Invisible, afraid, convinced that survival was the best she could hope for. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime. Morning came too quickly. Sophia knocked at 7 with coffee and a simple but elegant dress in Lena's size, navy blue with clean lines that suggested professional competence without trying too hard. For the lawyer meeting, Sophia explained. Mr. DeLuca thought you might not have brought appropriate clothing. Lena accepted the dress without comment, touched by the consideration even as it highlighted how unprepared she was for this world. The dress fit perfectly, which meant Marco had somehow known her size. Another reminder that he made it his business to know things, to anticipate needs before they were voiced. She found him in the dining area, already dressed in a charcoal suit that made him look like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine. He looked up from his tablet and gave her an approving nod. Good. You look like someone who makes her own decisions. That's important. He gestured to the spread of breakfast foods on the table. Eat. It's going to be a long day. The lawyer's office was in a building almost as impressive as Marco's, all glass and steel and the quiet hum of serious money being seriously managed. They were ushered immediately into a conference room where a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an expensive suit waited with several folders of documents. Mrs. Hart, I'm Jennifer Chen, Mr. DeLuca's attorney. She shook Lena's hand with professional warmth. Please sit. I know this is overwhelming, so I'm going to walk you through everything in detail. Feel free to ask any questions at any time. For the next 2 hours, Jennifer explained every clause of the marriage contract, the prenuptial agreement, the financial arrangements that would give Lena independent wealth and security. She outlined Marco's business interests, the legitimate ones and the ones that existed in legal gray areas, and explained exactly what being married to him would mean in practical terms. "You'll have your own security detail," Jennifer said, sliding another document across the table. "Sophia will be your primary bodyguard, but there will be others when needed. You'll have access to all of Mr. DeLuca's properties, including the penthouse, the house in Connecticut, and the villa in Italy. You'll receive a monthly allowance of $50,000 for personal expenses, separate from household accounts." Lena's head spun at the numbers. $50,000 a month was more than she'd made in 2 years of waitressing. "I want you to have your own lawyer review these documents," Marco said quietly. "Someone who represents only your interests. I can recommend several if you don't know anyone." "That will take days. You said we only have 48 hours. Then we extend the timeline. I'm not having you sign something you don't fully understand." Marco's voice was firm. "Jennifer, who's the best family law attorney you know who could review this today?" "Sarah Goldman. She's brilliant and she owes me a favor." Jennifer was already pulling out her phone. "I can have her here in an hour." Sarah Goldman arrived in 45 minutes, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every trick in the book. She took Lena to a separate conference room and spent another 2 hours going through every document, explaining implications and asking pointed questions about what Lena actually wanted from the arrangement. "This is the most generous prenup I've ever seen," Sarah said finally. "He's giving you financial independence, clear exit terms, and protections that go way beyond standard. Either he's genuinely trying to be fair, or he's very good at making advantageous arrangements look altruistic." "Which do you think it is?" Sarah studied the documents thoughtfully. "Honestly, both. He benefits from this marriage, legitimacy, stability, the appearance of having something to lose, but he has structured it so you benefit just as much, if not more. You're not signing away your autonomy or your future. You're entering a partnership with very clear terms and very generous compensation." "So I should sign?" "That's not for me to decide, but from a legal standpoint, you'd be protected. He can't abuse the arrangement without breaching the contract, which would trigger penalties that would cost him more than he'd gain. It's actually quite clever. He's incentivized to treat you well." Sarah leaned forward. "The question isn't whether the contract is fair. It's whether you trust him to honor the spirit of it, not just the letter." Lena thought about Marco sitting in the dark, drinking alone, admitting to isolation and the need for someone who understood survival. She thought about the careful distance he maintained, the consideration he showed, the genuine offer to delay everything so she could have her own legal counsel. "I trust him more than I trust most people," she said, "which might not be saying much given my history, but it's true." "Then the only question left is whether you want this life. Because once you sign, once you become Mrs. DeLuca, everything changes. You can leave later, yes, but you can't undo the experience of having been his wife. That's going to follow you. Being Ryan's girlfriend followed me too. At least this way, I get something out of it." Sarah smiled slightly. "Fair enough. Then I recommend you sign. But I want you to call me if anything feels wrong, if he violates any of these terms, if you need help getting out. My number will be in your phone before you leave this building." They returned to the main conference room where Marco and Jennifer were discussing something in low tones. Both looked up as Lena entered. "Well?" Marco's expression was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "Sarah says it's the fairest contract she's ever seen, so either you're genuinely trying to be decent or you're very good at manipulation." Lena sat down across from him. "I'm choosing to believe it's the first one, and I'm ready to sign." Something flickered in Marco's eyes. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be about marrying a near stranger to escape a dangerous ex and enter a world of organized crime." Lena picked up the pen Jennifer offered. "Which is to say, not certain at all, but doing it anyway." "That's honest." Marco took his own pen. "Then let's make it official." They signed in silence, Jennifer and Sarah witnessing each document with professional efficiency. With each signature, Lena felt the weight of her old life lifting, and the weight of her new one settling into place. Lena Hart was disappearing, replaced by Lena DeLuca, a woman she hadn't met yet, but would have to become. When the last document was signed, Marco stood and extended his hand. "Mrs. DeLuca, welcome to the family, such as it is." Lena shook his hand, feeling the strength in his grip and the calluses that suggested he was no stranger to physical work despite his current wealth. "Mr. DeLuca, try not to get me killed in the first week." A brief flash of genuine amusement crossed his face. "I'll do my best." Jennifer collected the documents with practiced efficiency. "I'll file these today. The marriage license will be ready tomorrow morning. Ceremony is scheduled for 2 p.m. at the courthouse, private room. Just the required witnesses." "Good." Marco turned to Lena. "The rest of today is yours. Sophia can take you shopping if you need anything. Tomorrow, after the ceremony, we have the dinner I mentioned. I'll have something appropriate sent to the penthouse for you to wear." "I can dress myself." "I know you can, but this dinner is going to be scrutinized by people looking for weakness. I want you armored in clothing that makes it clear you belong beside me." Marco's voice gentled. "Think of it as part of the uniform. You're playing a role tomorrow night. My wife, my equal, someone no one would dare underestimate." Lena wanted to argue, but she understood the logic. She had no idea how to dress for a world of wealth and power. Better to accept help than show up looking out of place. "Fine, but I choose my own jewelry." "Of course." Marco checked his watch. "I have meetings this afternoon. Sophia will stay with you. If you need anything at all, tell her." After he left, Sarah pulled Lena aside. "He's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone crueler, more overtly controlling." Sarah glanced toward the door Marco had exited. "Be careful anyway. Kindness can be a strategy too." "I know." Lena felt the weight of her decision settling into her bones. "But I'd rather take my chances with someone who's kind for strategic reasons than someone who's cruel for fun." Sophia drove her back to the penthouse in comfortable silence. Once there, Lana stood in the main living area and tried to imagine this as home, this space of wealth and carefully curated elegance as the place she would wake up every morning. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but she knew immediately who it was. "I'm coming for you. You can hide behind your new rich boyfriend, but it won't matter. You're mine, Lena. Always have been, always will be, and I'm going to remind you of that real soon." Ryan. Still fixated, still threatening. Proof that Marco had been right. Invisibility hadn't protected her, and nothing short of what they were doing would. She forwarded the text to Marco without comment. His response came within seconds. "Sophia's outside your building now, collecting the rest of your things. You're not going back there. And Ryan Castellano just moved to the top of my priority list." "What does that mean?" "It means he won't bother you again. Ever. Trust me." Lena should have felt guilty about whatever Marco was planning, should have felt some shred of sympathy for Ryan despite everything, but all she felt was relief, cold and absolute. Let Marco handle it. Let someone else carry the weight of dealing with the man who'd tried to destroy her. Sophia returned an hour later with 3 boxes, everything Lena owned in the world, fitting easily into the Mercedes's trunk. It was pathetic how little she had to show for 28 years of living, but maybe that was freeing too. Fewer ties to the past, less to mourn when she became someone new. That evening, a stylist arrived with clothing options for the dinner, elegant dresses in various styles, all carefully chosen to project power and confidence. Lena selected a black dress with clean lines and a high neckline, sophisticated without being showy. The stylist approved, then spent another hour explaining accessories, shoes, how to carry herself in rooms full of people who would be judging every detail. "You're not trying to impress them," the stylist said, pinning Lena's hair into an elegant updo. "You're showing them you don't need to. That's the trick. Confidence without arrogance, power without apology." "I'm a waitress pretending to be a crime lord's wife. How am I supposed to project confidence?" "You're not pretending. Tomorrow you will be his wife. Legally, officially, completely. The rest is just details." The stylist met her eyes in the mirror. "And honey, you survived an abusive relationship and built yourself back up from nothing. That takes more strength than most of these people will ever know. You just need to let them see it." Marco came home late, after Lena had already retreated to her room. But she heard him moving through the penthouse, heard the clink of glass that meant he was having his customary drink by the windows. She almost went out to join him, but something held her back. The awareness that tomorrow everything would change, that tonight was the last time she would be just Lena Hart, waitress and survivor. She woke to Sophia knocking with coffee and the news that the marriage license was ready, the ceremony scheduled for 2 p.m. as planned. Marco was already gone, attending to the mysterious business that filled his days with meetings and phone calls in languages Lena didn't speak. The courthouse was surprisingly mundane, just another government building with tired staff processing life's major transitions with bureaucratic efficiency. They were ushered into a private room where a judge waited with Jennifer and 2 of Marco's associates serving as witnesses. Marco arrived precisely at 2, wearing a dark suit that made him look both elegant and dangerous. He took Lena's hand as they stood before the judge, his grip warm and steady. "We're gathered to join Marco DeLuca and Lena Hart in marriage," the judge began, his tone suggesting he'd performed this ceremony 1,000 times and would perform it 1,000 more. "Do you, Marco, take Lena to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." Marco's voice was clear, certain, his eyes on Lena's with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And do you, Lena, take Marco to be your lawfully wedded husband?" This was it. The moment of no return. The choice that would define everything that came after. Lena thought about Ryan's threats, about 3 years of fear, about the woman she'd been forced to become just to survive. Then she thought about Marco's careful distance, his honest explanations, his promise to give her space to become whoever she was capable of being. "I do," she said, and meant it in ways she hadn't expected. The judge smiled. "Then, by the power vested in me by the state of New York, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Marco raised an eyebrow slightly, a silent question. Lena nodded, and he leaned in to press a brief, chaste kiss to her lips. Nothing passionate or romantic, just the seal on their agreement made flesh. When he pulled back, there was something different in his eyes. Not love, but perhaps respect. Recognition of what they'd both just committed to. "Mrs. DeLuca," he said quietly. "Mr. DeLuca," she replied, testing out the name that was now legally hers. They signed the certificate, the witnesses added their signatures, and just like that, Lena Hart ceased to exist. In her place stood Lena DeLuca, wife of the most dangerous man in the city, protected and exposed in equal measure. In the car afterward, Marco took her hand. "How do you feel?" "Terrified. Relieved. Like I just jumped off a cliff and I'm waiting to see if I can fly or if I'm just falling." "Probably both." Marco's thumb brushed over her knuckles, a gesture that felt almost unconscious. "The dinner tonight. Are you ready?" "No, but I'll do it anyway. That's all I ask." He released her hand and pulled out his phone, returning to the constant flow of business that defined his days. But before he fully turned away, he added, "You did well today, Lena. Better than I expected." It wasn't much of a compliment, but coming from him, it felt like everything. The penthouse felt different when they returned, as though the legal documents and spoken vows had somehow altered the molecular structure of the space. Lena was no longer a guest. She was the wife of the man who owned it, which meant it belonged to her too now, in ways she was still trying to comprehend. Sophia had laid out the black dress on Lena's bed along with shoes, jewelry, and a small card in Marco's precise handwriting. "Wear what makes you feel strong. The rest doesn't matter." Lena showered and dressed with the same careful attention she'd once given to waitressing shifts, understanding that tonight was a performance with higher stakes than she'd ever faced. The woman who looked back at her from the mirror was almost unrecognizable, elegant, composed, every inch the wife of someone powerful. But her eyes were the same, still carrying the weight of everything she'd survived. Marco knocked at her door precisely at 7. When she opened it, his expression shifted almost imperceptibly, approval mixed with something that might have been surprise. "You look formidable," he said simply. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be." Lena took a breath. "What exactly am I walking into tonight?" "A dinner with 15 of my closest business associates and their wives or companions. Some of them run legitimate enterprises. Others operate in the same gray areas I do. All of them need to see us together, Need to understand that our marriage is real and that you're under my complete protection." Marco offered his arm. "Stay close to me. Let me guide conversations, but don't be afraid to speak if addressed directly. These people respect strength, and silence can be mistaken for weakness." The restaurant was exclusive enough that it didn't need a name, just an unmarked door in a building Lena had walked past 1,000 times without knowing what existed inside. A private dining room had been reserved, all dark wood and soft lighting that made everyone look both beautiful and slightly dangerous. Marco's hand settled on the small of Lena's back as they entered, a gesture of possession that felt less invasive than she'd expected. His associates turned as one, conversations pausing mid-sentence as they took in the sight of Marco De Luca with a woman on his arm. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my wife, Lena." Marco's voice carried absolute authority. "Lena, these are my trusted colleagues and friends." The introductions blurred together, names and faces that Lena knew she'd need to memorize but couldn't quite catalog in the moment. There was Vincent Romano, older with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Robert Chen, younger and sharp-edged, with a wife who looked bored until she saw Lena and suddenly became very interested. Maria Santos, the only woman who seemed to hold power in her own right rather than through marriage, who studied Lena with frank assessment. They moved through the room like royalty, Marco making small talk while Lena smiled and nodded and tried not to betray how completely out of her depth she felt. Everyone was gracious, welcoming even, but she could feel the calculation behind every compliment, every question about how they'd met or where she was from. "You're not what I expected," Maria said during a lull in conversation, her accent carrying hints of Barcelona. "Marco's never shown interest in marriage before. I'd started to think he was married to his work." "Sometimes the right person comes along when you least expect it," Lena replied, the lie tasting less bitter than she'd anticipated. "And sometimes the right person is exactly what we need at exactly the right time." Maria's smile was knowing. "I've been in this world long enough to recognize a strategic alliance when I see one. But that doesn't make it less valuable. My own marriage started as convenience. 20 years later, I couldn't imagine my life without him." Before Lena could respond, Marco appeared at her elbow with a glass of wine. "Maria's trying to determine if you're going to be a liability or an asset," he said mildly. "What's your assessment, Maria?" "Asset, definitely. She's got survival instincts. I can see it in how she reads the room." Maria raised her own glass in a small toast. "Welcome to the family, such as it is. We'll be watching your progress with great interest." Dinner was an elaborate affair, course after course of food Lena couldn't have afforded in a year of waitressing. The conversations flowed around her, business deals disguised as casual chat, territorial negotiations wrapped in pleasantries, alliances forming and dissolving with the subtlety of chess masters moving pieces on a board. Marco kept her anchored with small touches, a hand on her shoulder when someone addressed her, fingers brushing hers when he passed her something, the weight of his attention even when he was deep in conversation with someone else. It was all performance, she reminded herself, all part of the role they were playing. But when Vincent Romano leaned across the table and said, "So Lena, Marco tells us you were working in the service industry before. That must be quite a change." There was an edge to his voice that made the question feel like a test. "It is," Lena agreed, meeting his gaze steadily. "I've learned more about human nature serving coffee to strangers at 3 a.m. than most people learn in a lifetime of polite society. People reveal themselves when they think you're not worth pretending for." Vincent's eyebrows rose slightly. "And what did you learn?" "That the richest people are often the worst tippers, that kindness is rarer than money, and that everyone, regardless of their circumstances, just wants to be seen as human." Lena took a sip of wine. Working service teaches you to read people quickly, to anticipate needs before they're voiced, to navigate power dynamics where you have none. Those are useful skills in any context. A brief silence fell over the table, then Vincent laughed, a genuine sound of appreciation. "Marco, your wife is far more interesting than you led us to believe. I like her." "I thought you might." Marco's hand found Lena's under the table, squeezed once in what might have been approval or gratitude. The evening continued, and Lena found herself relaxing incrementally, understanding the rhythm of these interactions. Everyone here operated on multiple levels. What they said, what they meant, what they were really asking. It wasn't so different from managing difficult customers at the diner, just with higher stakes and better wine. Robert Chen's wife, Diana, cornered Lena near the dessert course. Can I give you some advice? Wife to wife? Please. Don't try to change him. Don't try to soften him or make him into something safer. These men, our men, they are what they are. The ones who survive in this world are the ones who accept that. Diana's smile was brittle. Love them or don't, but never try to save them. They don't want saving, and you'll only destroy yourself trying. I'm not trying to save anyone, Lena said quietly. I'm just trying to survive. Good. That's honest. I like honest. Diana glanced at where Robert was deep in conversation with Marco. Just remember, in this world, honesty is a weapon. Be careful who you show it to. As the dinner wound down and people began making their departures, Marco stood and raised his glass. Before everyone leaves, I want to say something. Many of you have known me for years. You've seen me build this enterprise, make difficult decisions, do what was necessary to survive and thrive. But you've never seen me take a partner, never seen me choose someone to stand beside me. He looked at Lena with an expression she couldn't quite read. Lena is not just my wife on paper. She is my equal in every way that matters. What's mine is hers. Anyone who shows her disrespect shows me disrespect. Anyone who threatens her threatens me. I want that to be absolutely clear to everyone in this room and everyone you speak to after you leave it. The weight of those words settled over the gathering like a physical thing. This wasn't just an announcement. It was a declaration of war against anyone who might consider using Lena as leverage. To new beginnings, Vincent said, raising his glass, and to partnerships that make us all stronger. Everyone drank, and Lena understood that she'd just been claimed in front of witnesses, that her protection was now a matter of Marco's reputation and power. It should have felt suffocating, but instead it felt like armor settling into place. The car ride home was quiet. Marco seemed lost in thought, his phone silent for once as he stared out at the city lights. Finally, he turned to Lena. You did better than well tonight. You were perfect. I was terrified. I know, but you didn't show it, which is what mattered. Marco's voice softened. Vincent will spread word throughout the organization that you're smart and self-possessed. Maria will tell her contacts that you're someone to watch. Diana will warn people that you're not naive. All of that protects you in ways I can't directly. By making me an asset instead of a liability. By making you a person, not just my wife. By establishing that you have your own value beyond being connected to me. Marco reached over and took her hand. I know this is overwhelming. I know it's not what you imagined when you thought about marriage, if you ever thought about it. But you're doing exactly what you need to do, surviving, adapting, becoming whoever you need to be. Lena looked at their joined hands, at the wedding band that now encircled her finger, platinum, simple, expensive in its understated elegance. What happens now? Do we just keep pretending until it becomes real? I don't know. Marco's honesty was surprising. I've never done this before either, but I think we figure it out as we go. We honor our agreement, we protect each other, and we see what develops. Back at the penthouse, Lena kicked off the elegant shoes and sank onto the couch, exhausted from the performance. Marco loosened his tie and poured them both a drink, settling into his usual chair by the windows. Can I ask you something personal? Lena ventured. You're my wife now. You can ask me anything. Have you ever been in love? Really in love, not just strategic partnerships? Marco was quiet for so long that Lena thought he wouldn't answer. Then, softly, once, a long time ago, before I built all of this. She was kind, gentle, wanted nothing to do with the life I was choosing. I let her go because keeping her would have meant dragging her into darkness she didn't deserve. Do you regret it? Every day. But I regret what staying with me would have done to her more. Marco took a drink. She's married now, to a doctor, has 3 children, lives in the suburbs and probably never thinks about me. That's exactly what I wanted for her. That's sad. That's survival for both of us. Marco looked at Lena with something in his eyes that might have been old pain. She couldn't have stood beside me at a dinner like tonight without losing pieces of herself. You did it without breaking. That's why this works. Not because we love each other, but because we understand each other. Lena nodded, understanding the truth of it, even as part of her mourned for the girl Marco had loved and lost. What happened to Ryan? You said he was your priority. He's been dealt with. He won't contact you again. Did you? Lena stopped, unsure if she wanted to know. He's alive, if that's what you're asking, currently recovering in a private hospital from injuries sustained during a regrettable accident. When he's healed, he'll be leaving the state with a generous settlement and the understanding that returning would be very bad for his health. Marco's voice was utterly calm. He signed papers this afternoon relinquishing any claim to you, any right to contact you, any connection to your life. As far as the law is concerned, Ryan Castellano has never met Lena DeLuca. Lena should have felt something: guilt, horror, moral conflict. Instead, she felt only relief and a dark satisfaction that someone had finally made Ryan face consequences. Thank you. Don't thank me for that. I'd do far worse to anyone who threatened you. Marco stood and moved to the windows. You should know that being my wife means I'll always handle threats this way, not through law or proper channels, but through the methods I know work. If that bothers you, if you need me to operate differently, tell me now. It doesn't bother me. Lena joined him at the windows, looking out over the city that felt less hostile now that she had Marco's name and protection. Maybe that makes me a bad person. Maybe I should care more about justice and doing things the right way. But Ryan hurt me for years and no one stopped him. You stopped him in days. I'm not going to apologize for being grateful. You're not a bad person. You're a practical one. There's a difference. Marco glanced at her. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start establishing our routine. You need security protocols, a schedule, accounts set up in your name. The business of being Mrs. DeLuca. Lena headed toward her room but paused at the doorway. Marco, this marriage, do you think it could ever become something real? Or is it always going to be just an arrangement? His expression was unreadable in the dim light. I don't know, Lena. I've spent 15 years building walls to protect myself. I'm not sure I remember how to let anyone pass them. But if anyone could... He trailed off, then shook his head. Ask me again in a year. Maybe by then, I'll have an answer. The next morning brought a new reality. Sophia woke Lena at 7 with coffee and the news that Marco had meetings all day, but had left instructions for her orientation. Over the next several hours, Lena was introduced to the household staff, a rotating team who maintained the penthouse but gave them privacy when needed. She met Marco's accountant, who set up bank accounts and credit cards in her name with balances that made her dizzy. She learned security protocols, safe routes through the city, emergency contacts, and the countless small details that went into being married to someone powerful enough to have enemies. By noon, Lena's head was spinning with information. She was relieved when Sophia suggested lunch and a break from the endless orientation. They went to a cafe Marco apparently owned, where the staff greeted Sophia warmly and treated Lena with careful deference the moment they learned who she was. It's strange, Lena said over coffee that was infinitely better than anything she'd served at the diner. Yesterday, I was nobody. Today, everyone treats me like I matter. You always mattered, Sophia said quietly. The difference is now people can see it. Because of Marco. Because of the choice you made. Don't diminish that. Sophia leaned back in her chair. I told you my story, how Mr. DeLuca saved me from my ex-husband. What I didn't tell you is that he gave me a choice afterward. I could accept his help and walk away, start a new life somewhere safe. Or I could work for him, be part of his organization. Most people would have run. I chose to stay and fight. Why? Because running meant spending the rest of my life afraid that my ex would find me. Working for Mr. DeLuca meant having the power to protect myself and others like me. Sophia's gaze was direct. You made the same choice, Lena. You could have refused his offer, tried to handle Ryan on your own. Instead, you chose to ally yourself with someone who could actually stop the threat. That takes courage, not weakness. Lena wanted to believe that, but doubt still gnawed at her. What if I'm just trading one controlling man for another? What if Marco... Mr. DeLuca is many things, but he's not a controller of people in that way. He values loyalty, competence, and honesty. Give him those things and he gives you freedom within his protection. Sophia paused. But test him, betray him, or show weakness his enemies can exploit, and you'll learn why people fear him. He's not cruel, but he's ruthless when necessary. That evening, Marco returned to the penthouse looking exhausted. He loosened his tie and sank onto the couch, and Lena surprised herself by bringing him a whiskey without being asked. "Thank you." He took the glass with a tired smile. "How was your first full day as Mrs. DeLuca?" Overwhelming, educational, slightly terrifying. Lena settled into the chair across from him. "Your accountant nearly gave me a heart attack when he showed me the account balances." "Get used to it. Money is a tool, Lena. Use it however you want. Save it, spend it, invest it, give it away. It's yours." Marco took a drink. "I need to tell you something. Tomorrow I have a business meeting that might be dangerous. I'll have extra security, but there's always risk when dealing with certain people. If something happens to me, don't." Lena's voice was sharper than she intended. "Don't talk like that." "I have to. You need to know what happens if I die or end up incapacitated." Marco's voice was gentle but firm. "Jennifer has all the documents. You'd inherit everything. The business, the properties, the organization. Vincent would help manage the transition. You'd be protected and wealthy beyond measure. But you'd also become a target until you either proved yourself capable or sold everything and disappeared." The casual way he discussed his potential death made Lena's chest tight. "I don't want your money if you're dead. I want you alive to honor our agreement." Something flickered in Marco's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something warmer. "Why? We barely know each other." "Because you're the first person in years who's treated me like I matter. Because you kept your word about everything. Because—" Lena paused, searching for truth she wasn't sure she wanted to voice. "Because I think we could actually be friends, if we gave it time. And I've had enough loss. I'm not interested in losing someone else." Marco set down his glass and crossed to where she sat, kneeling so they were eye level. "I'm going to be fine. This meeting is just business, and I've survived far worse. But I needed you to know the contingencies because you deserve to be prepared." He took her hand. "Thank you for caring. Even if it's just strategic caring, it's more than I expected." "It's not strategic," Lena surprised herself with the admission. "I actually like you, Marco, which complicates things, but there it is." His laugh was quiet, almost wondering. "I like you too, which might be the most unexpected development of this entire arrangement." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Come on, I'm exhausted and you look tired. Let's call it a night." But as Lena headed toward her room, Marco called her back. "Would you like to have breakfast together tomorrow? Not for business or appearances, just because I'd enjoy the company." "I'd like that," Lena said, and meant it. The next morning they shared coffee and pastries while Marco read the news on his tablet, and Lena worked through a book Sophia had recommended about the city's history and power structures. It was comfortable, domestic, in a way that made Lena's chest ache with unexpected longing for something that might never be truly real. Marco left for his meeting with a team of guards that made Lena nervous, despite Sophia's assurances that this was standard procedure. The hours crawled by as Lena tried to distract herself with orientation materials and exploring the penthouse more thoroughly. She was in Marco's study, a room she'd avoided until now, when her phone rang. Unknown number, but something made her answer. "Mrs. DeLuca?" A woman's voice, professional and cold. "My name is Detective Sarah Morrison. I'm with the Special Investigations Unit. I need to speak with you about your husband's business activities." Lena's blood ran cold. "I don't know anything about my husband's business." "That's not what we've heard. We have evidence suggesting you've been involved in his operations, possibly as a money launderer or information courier." The detective's voice sharpened. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Mrs. DeLuca. Either you come in voluntarily for questioning or we obtain a warrant for your arrest." "I want to speak to my lawyer." "That's certainly your right. But know this, we're building a case against Marco DeLuca. He's going down for racketeering, money laundering, and possibly murder. The question is whether you go down with him or whether you cooperate and save yourself." The call ended, leaving Lena shaking. She immediately dialed Jennifer, then Sophia, then tried Marco's number and got only voicemail. For 20 agonizing minutes, she paced the penthouse, imagining worst-case scenarios, wondering if she'd just traded Ryan's abuse for a federal investigation. Finally, Marco called back. "Lena? Sophia said you've been trying to reach me. What's wrong?" "The police called, a detective. She says they're building a case against you, that I'm implicated, that I need to come in for questioning." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Marco, what do I do?" A pause, then Marco's voice came back utterly calm. "Don't panic. This is expected. Give me the detective's name and number. Don't speak to anyone without Jennifer present. I'm coming home now." "Are you in danger? Is the meeting—" "The meeting is fine. I'm fine. Stay in the penthouse. Don't answer the door for anyone except Sophia or me. I'll be there in 20 minutes. His voice gentled. "Lena, this is going to be okay. I've handled law enforcement before. They're fishing, trying to scare you into giving them something. But they have nothing real or they wouldn't be calling. They'd be arresting." Marco arrived in 15 minutes, bringing Jennifer with him. They settled in the living room and Marco took Lena's hands in his. "Tell me exactly what she said." Lena repeated the conversation word for word, watching Marco's expression harden with each sentence. When she finished, he exchanged a look with Jennifer that Lena couldn't interpret. "It's a bluff," Jennifer said firmly. "If they had real evidence, they'd move officially through proper channels. This is an intimidation tactic designed to scare a new wife into cooperation." "Can they arrest me?" Lena asked. "Not without probable cause, which they don't have because you haven't done anything illegal." Jennifer pulled out her laptop. "I'm going to contact the detective and make it clear that any further communication goes through me. They won't call you directly again." After Jennifer left to make calls from Marco's study, Lena sank onto the couch, adrenaline fading into exhaustion. Marco sat beside her, closer than he'd been before, his presence solid and reassuring. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I knew this world came with risks, but I hoped we'd have more time before they came for you. They're using me to get to you." "They're trying to. It won't work. You're innocent of everything they might accuse you of, and Jennifer will ensure they understand that fact." Marco's jaw tightened. "But I need you to know something, Lena. If this escalates, if they push harder, you have the option to walk away. Our marriage gives you protections, but it also makes you a target. If that's not what you signed up for, stop." Lena turned to face him fully. "I knew marrying you meant entering your world. I knew that meant risk. One threatening phone call doesn't change my decision." "It might be more than one phone call." "This could get complicated, dangerous. They might try to freeze assets, restrict your movement, make your life difficult to pressure me into mistakes." Marco's expression was grave. "I need you to be certain you want to stay. Because once this begins, extracting you becomes harder." Lena thought about the woman she'd been a week ago. Invisible, afraid, convinced that survival was the best she could hope for. Then she thought about the woman she was becoming. Someone who attended dinners with criminals and spoke her mind. Someone who wore expensive dresses and stood beside power without flinching. Someone who mattered enough that the police thought she was worth intimidating. "I'm staying," she said firmly. "We made a deal, Marco. I honor my deals. Besides," she managed a small smile, "I'm finally starting to like being visible. I'm not ready to go back to hiding." Marco's expression softened into something that might have been admiration or affection or something else entirely. "You're extraordinary, you know that?" "You keep saying that. I'm starting to almost believe it." "Good. You should." Marco stood and held out his hand. "Come on. I think we both need a drink and a moment to breathe. Then we'll plan our next moves." As Lena took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, she realized that somewhere in the past week, she'd stopped thinking of Marco as a stranger she'd married for protection. He was becoming something else, a partner, maybe even a friend, someone who saw her, valued her, protected her not because he owned her, but because he'd chosen her. It was a start, and in a life that had offered her so little for so long, a start felt like everything. The investigation became their new reality over the following weeks. Detective Morrison and her team tried every angle. Surveillance that Sophia spotted and neutralized, financial audits that Jennifer deflected with impeccable documentation, interviews with Marco's associates that yielded nothing because loyalty in his world was bought and paid for in protection and mutual benefit. Through it all, Lena discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed, refusing to be intimidated by officials who saw her as nothing more than a criminal's naive wife. But the pressure was taking its toll on Marco. Lena watched him work longer hours, take calls at 3 in the morning, meet with lawyers and accountants, and people whose faces she recognized from the dinner party. He was transitioning his enterprise toward legitimacy faster than planned, selling off questionable assets and reinvesting in businesses that could withstand scrutiny. It was exhausting work, and Lena found herself staying up with him more nights than not, offering silent company while he strategized survival. "You should be sleeping," Marco said one night, finding her curled up in the chair by the windows with a book she wasn't really reading. "So should you." Lena set the book aside. "But we're both too wired, so we might as well be wired together." Marco smiled, that rare expression that softened the severe lines of his face. "I've been thinking about what happens after all this. Assuming we survive the investigation and I successfully transition everything to legitimacy, what then?" "What do you mean?" "I mean for us, for this arrangement." Marco poured himself a drink and settled onto the couch. "It's been 2 months, Lena. 2 months of living together, facing threats together, becoming something neither of us expected. And I find myself wondering if the arrangement is still what you want, or if you're staying out of obligation." Lena's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Are you asking if I want a divorce?" "I'm asking if you want something more." Marco's dark eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity. "Because I do. I want this to be real, not just a transaction, not just protection and convenience. I want you to stay because you choose me, not because you're afraid of what happens if you leave." The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable and terrifying. Lena had felt their relationship shifting over the past weeks, noticed the way Marco's touches lingered, the way his smiles came more easily, the way he sought her company even when business didn't require it. But hearing him voice it made it real in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. "I don't know if I know how to be in a real relationship," she said quietly. "Ryan destroyed my ability to trust that love isn't just another form of control. And you're powerful and dangerous, and sometimes I'm not sure if what I feel is genuine or just gratitude for being protected." "That's honest." Marco set down his drink. "I don't know if I know how to love someone without it becoming a liability. The woman I loved before, I let her go because keeping her meant destroying her. With you, I'm not sure I could let you go, even if it was the right thing to do. That terrifies me." "Why?" "Because it means you have power over me. Real power, not the kind that comes from fear or money. The power to hurt me in ways my enemies never could." Marco's voice roughened. "And I've spent my entire adult life ensuring no one had that power." Lena stood and moved to sit beside him on the couch, close enough that their knees touched. "What if we just see what happens? No pressure to define it or force it into something it's not. We're already married, already living together, already facing the world as a team. Maybe we just acknowledge that it's become more than a transaction and let it develop naturally. Without expectations, without demands. If it grows into love, wonderful. If it stays as partnership and friendship, that's valuable too." Lena took his hand. "I like you, Marco. I respect you. I'm attracted to you in ways that probably aren't smart given our circumstances. And I want to see where this goes without the weight of having to label it or define it perfectly." Marco brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent heat through her entire body. "I can work with that. Though fair warning, I'm not good at casual. When I commit to something, I commit completely." "I'm starting to understand that about you." Lena smiled. "Just promise me one thing. If this becomes real, if we fall into something that looks like love, promise you won't try to protect me by pushing me away. I'm not that gentle woman you lost. I can handle your darkness because I have my own. I promise to try. That's the best I can offer." Marco's thumb brushed over her wrist, a gesture of intimacy that felt more significant than it should. "Now go to sleep. We have a meeting with Jennifer tomorrow about the investigation, and you need to be sharp." But as Lena stood to leave, Marco caught her hand. "Wait, stay, just for tonight. I'm tired of sleeping alone in this too big apartment, and I think you are too." Lena's breath caught. "Marco." "Just sleeping. I'm not asking for more than that. Just Company, presence, someone to wake up next to who isn't there because they're paid to be. His voice carried a vulnerability she'd never heard before. Please. She should have said no, should have maintained the boundaries they'd carefully constructed. But Lena was tired too. Tired of sleeping alone. Tired of pretending she didn't want exactly what he was offering. Tired of protecting herself from the possibility of being hurt. Okay, she whispered. Just for tonight. They ended up in Marco's room, which Lena had never entered before. It was surprisingly sparse, a massive bed, minimal furniture, windows that overlooked the city he controlled. Marco gave her one of his shirts to sleep in, turned away while she changed, and then they lay in the darkness on opposite sides of the bed, like teenagers afraid of what might happen if they touched. This is ridiculous, Lena said, after 10 minutes of rigid silence. We're both adults. We can share a bed without it being weird. I'm trying to be respectful. Marco's voice carried amusement. But you're right. Come here. He pulled her against him, her back to his chest, his arm wrapped around her waist in a hold that was protective rather than possessive. Lena felt herself relax into his warmth, into the steady rhythm of his breathing, into the first real sense of safety she'd experienced since Ryan had destroyed her ability to trust. Thank you, she murmured, already half asleep. For what? For seeing me. For choosing me. For making me believe I could be someone other than invisible and afraid. Lena laced her fingers through his. Even if this all falls apart tomorrow, you gave me that. It matters. Marco's arms tightened around her. It's not falling apart. I won't let it. You're mine now, Lena. Not in the way Ryan thought he owned you, but in the way that matters. And I protect what's mine. She fell asleep feeling safer than she had in years, wrapped in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city. And for once, the irony of that didn't bother her at all. Morning brought Jennifer's call with news that changed everything. The investigation had collapsed. Not because they'd found Marco innocent, but because the lead detective had been discovered taking bribes from one of Marco's rivals, trying to manufacture evidence to bring him down. The entire case was compromised, the unit disbanded, and Marco was cleared of all current charges. It's over? Lena asked, hardly daring to believe it. For now, Jennifer confirmed. They could come back with something else eventually, but they've lost their momentum and their credibility. You're both clear. Marco took the news with characteristic calm, but Lena could see the relief in the way his shoulders relaxed, the way his smile came easier. They celebrated quietly that night, just the two of them with expensive wine and takeout from Marco's favorite restaurant, talking until the early hours about everything and nothing. So what now? Lena asked. You've been working toward legitimacy. Does this change your timeline? It accelerates it. I'm close to finalizing the sale of my remaining questionable operations. Within 6 months, everything I own will be completely legal. Shipping, real estate, restaurants, security consultancies. Marco traced patterns on her hand with his thumb. I'll still have the reputation, the connections, the power, but the business itself will be clean. And then what? You become a respected businessman? Join the country club? Marco laughed. Something like that. Though I doubt any country club would have me. But yes, I'll transition from feared to respected, from criminal to legitimate. It's the only way to build something that lasts, that can't be taken away by ambitious prosecutors or rival organizations. It's strange to think of you as legitimate. It's strange for me too. But I'm tired, Lena. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of violence and threats and the constant calculation of who might betray me next. I want to build something real, something that doesn't require darkness to sustain it. He pulled her closer. And I want to do it with you beside me. Not as a convenient wife, but as an actual partner. Before Lena could respond, her phone buzzed with a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Lena Hart? A woman's voice, uncertain and young. I mean, Lena DeLuca? My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm calling from Children's Hope Hospital. I'm not sure if you remember me. Lena's blood turned to ice. Children's Hope Hospital. The hospital where she'd given birth 7 years ago, where she'd held her daughter for exactly 3 hours before signing the adoption papers that had broken her heart into pieces she'd never quite reassembled. I remember, Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marco's attention sharpened immediately, his hand finding hers in silent support. I'm calling because the family who adopted your daughter, the Hendersons, they were in a car accident 3 weeks ago. Both parents died instantly. Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but clinical. Emma is fine physically, but she's traumatized and the state is trying to place her. When they reviewed her file, they discovered that you never formally terminated your parental rights. You'd signed adoption papers, but there was an administrative error and they were never fully processed. The room spun. What does that mean? It means legally, you're still Emma's mother. The adoption was never finalized. You have the legal right to reclaim custody if you choose, or you can terminate your rights now, and she'll enter foster care while they search for another placement. How long do I have to decide? The state would like an answer within 72 hours. I know this is sudden and difficult, but Emma needs stability. She's been asking questions about her birth mother. The Hendersons had always planned to tell her the truth when she was older, but now... Dr. Chen paused. She's 7 years old, Lena. She's smart and scared, and she's lost the only parent she's ever known. Whatever you decide, please decide quickly, for her sake. After the call ended, Lena sat in stunned silence, trying to process information that felt impossible. Her daughter, the baby she'd held for 3 hours before convincing herself that giving her up was the only way to give her a better life, was alive, orphaned, and legally still hers. Talk to me, Marco said quietly. What just happened? So Lena told him everything. About getting pregnant at 21 by a man who disappeared the moment she told him. About being broke and terrified and convinced she couldn't give a child the life she deserved. About the adoption agency that had seemed so professional. The couple who had seemed so perfect, successful, stable. Everything Lena wasn't. About holding her daughter and memorizing her face and then signing papers that felt like tearing out her own heart. I thought I was doing the right thing, Lena said, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was giving her a chance at a real family, a real life, and now she's lost them, and I'm married to you, living this life that's barely stable, and the state is asking if I want her back like it's a simple question. Marco pulled her into his arms and let her cry against his chest, his hand stroking her hair with surprising gentleness. When she finally quieted, he said, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know, I can't think." 7 years, Marco. I haven't seen her in 7 years. I'm a stranger to her. What if I make everything worse? Or what if you give her exactly what she needs? A mother who understands loss and survival, who can teach her to be strong. Marco tilted her face up to meet his eyes. I know you're scared, but I also know you've been carrying the weight of that decision for 7 years. Maybe this is your chance to choose differently. You didn't sign up for this. You married me for protection and legitimacy, not to become an instant stepfather to a traumatized 7-year-old. I married you because I saw strength and potential and someone worth protecting. That hasn't changed. Marco's voice was firm. But this is your decision, Lena. I can't make it for you. I can only tell you that whatever you choose, I'll support it. If you want to bring Emma home, we'll make it work. If you decide it's not right, I'll stand by that too. Lena pulled away and walked to the windows, looking out over the city that had taken so much from her and given so much back. She thought about the woman she'd been at 21, broke, alone, convinced she had nothing to offer. Then she thought about who she was now. Marco's wife, financially secure, protected, becoming someone who mattered. But more than that, she thought about Emma. 7 years old, orphaned, scared, being told that her birth mother existed but might not want her. What message would that send? What wound would it create that could never be healed? I want to meet her first, Lena said finally, before I decide anything. I need to see her, talk to her if she's willing, understand what she needs. This can't be about what I want or what makes me feel better about the past. It has to be about what's best for her. That's fair. Marco moved to stand beside her. I'll call Jennifer, have her sort out the legal complications. And Lena, whatever happens, you're not alone in this. You understand that, right? She nodded, not trusting her voice. The weight of the decision felt crushing, but having Marco beside her made it bearable. They'd built something real over the past months. Not the romance of fairy tales, but something more solid. partnership, trust, the kind of intimacy that came from facing darkness together and choosing to stay. The meeting with Emma was arranged for 2 days later at the hospital where she was staying while the state figured out placement. Lena barely slept the night before, running through scenarios and speeches and trying to prepare for a moment that felt impossible to prepare for. Marco insisted on coming with her, and Lena was grateful for his presence in the car, even though her nerves made conversation impossible. Dr. Chen met them at the hospital entrance, her expression kind but professional. Emma knows you're coming. The social worker explained that you're her birth mother and that you want to meet her. She's curious but guarded. Dr. Chen led them through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and sadness. Don't expect immediate connection. She's grieving, traumatized and confused about why her birth mother is appearing now. Be patient. They reached a small room where a child sat on a too-big couch, clutching a stuffed rabbit with worn fur and missing eyes. Emma had Lana's dark hair and the same delicate bone structure, but her eyes were different, hazel instead of brown, a gift from the father who'd disappeared. She looked up as they entered, her expression wary. Emma, this is Lena DeLuca, your birth mother, Dr. Chen said gently. And this is her husband, Marco. Hi, Emma. Lena's voice shook despite her best efforts. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Emma studied her with unsettling intensity for a 7-year-old. Why did you give me away? The question was direct, brutal in its simplicity. Lena glanced at Marco, who gave her an encouraging nod, then moved to sit at Emma's eye level. Because I was very young and very scared and very broke, and I thought that giving you to parents who had money and stability was the best thing I could do for you. I wanted you to have everything I couldn't give you. Lena's voice cracked. I loved you enough to let you go. That's what I told myself. But now I'm wondering if that was just an excuse because I was too afraid to try. Do you still love me? Emma's voice was small, uncertain. I never stopped. Not for 1 day in 7 years. I thought about you every birthday, every holiday, wondering if you were happy, if your parents were good to you, if you ever thought about me. Lena felt tears streaming down her face but didn't wipe them away. And I'm so sorry that you lost them. They must have been wonderful people to have raised someone as brave as you. Emma's lower lip trembled. They were the best. And now they're gone and everyone keeps saying I need to be strong, but I don't want to be strong. I want my mom and dad back. I know, sweetheart, and nothing I do or say can fix that. Lena's heart was breaking. But I'm here now, and if you think you could maybe, eventually, I'd like to be part of your life. Not to replace your parents. No one could ever replace them. But maybe as someone who cares about you and wants to help you through this. Emma looked at Marco, who'd stayed silent in the background. Are you nice to her? My friend Katie's mom got married again, and her new stepdad is mean. Marco moved forward and crouched beside Lena. I try to be good to her. Sometimes I work too much and forget to be as kind as I should be. But I promise you this. If Lena brings you home, I will do everything in my power to make sure you're safe and happy and never feel like you're in the way. Do you have a big house? Very big, with a room that could be yours if you wanted. We could decorate it however you like, whatever colors, whatever posters, whatever makes it feel like home. Marco's voice was surprisingly gentle. And we have security people who would make sure no one ever hurts you. You'd be very safe with us. Emma was quiet for a long moment, then looked back at Lena. Can I think about it? I don't know if I'm ready to decide. Of course you can think about it. Take all the time you need. Lena started to stand, but Emma's small hand caught hers. Will you come back? Even if I say no, will you still come visit me? Yes, as often as they'll let me. You don't have to come home with us for me to be part of your life, Emma. I'm not going anywhere. Lena squeezed her daughter's hand gently. Whatever you decide, I'm here. I promise. They visited Emma every day for a week. Slow conversations about favorite colors and books, about the Hendersons and how much Emma missed them, about what scared her and what she hoped for. Marco came too, winning Emma over with patience and the kind of steady presence that made her feel safe. By the end of the week, when the social worker said they needed a decision, Emma had already made it. I want to come home, she said, looking between Lena and Marco. I'm still sad about Mom and Dad, and I don't know if I can call you Mom yet. but I want to try. I want to see if we can be a family. The process of bringing Emma home took another 2 weeks of paperwork, evaluations, and meetings with social workers who needed to be convinced that Marco's past wouldn't endanger a child. Jennifer worked her usual magic, presenting Marco's transition to legitimacy as evidence of stability, and finally, on a bright Saturday morning, Emma walked into the penthouse with her small suitcase and her worn rabbit and her enormous, fragile hope. They'd prepared a room for her, not too childish, respecting that she'd just lost everything and didn't need to feel patronized, but warm and welcoming with books and art supplies and a window seat that overlooked the city. Emma stood in the doorway and stared. "This is really mine?" "Really yours," Lena confirmed. "We can change anything you don't like. Paint the walls, get different furniture, whatever you want." Emma set down her suitcase and moved to the window seat, curling up with her rabbit and looking out over the city. "It's so high up, I can see everything." "You can," Marco said, settling nearby but giving her space. "It's a good place to think, to watch the world. I use it sometimes when I need to figure things out." "Do you need to figure things out a lot?" "More than you'd think. Being a grown-up doesn't mean you have all the answers. It just means you're better at pretending you do." Marco smiled slightly. "But I'm learning that asking for help is actually smarter than pretending. Your mom has been teaching me that." Emma looked at Lena with those hazel eyes that had haunted her dreams for 7 years. "Can I call you Lena for now? Until I'm ready for Mom?" "You can call me whatever feels right. There's no rush, Emma. We have time." Lena sat on the other side of the window seat. "Do you want to talk about your parents? About the Hendersons? I know the social workers said it's important to remember them." So Emma talked, haltingly at first, and then in a rush, about her mom who made the best pancakes and her dad who did silly voices when he read bedtime stories, about family vacations and birthday parties and the ordinary, beautiful details of a childhood that had been full of love until it was shattered by random tragedy. Lena listened and cried and held her daughter while Marco sat nearby, a solid presence that made them both feel protected. The first weeks were hard. Emma had nightmares that sent her crying into Lena's room at 2 a.m. She struggled in her new school, making friends difficult when she was processing grief that most 7-year-olds couldn't understand. There were moments when Lena doubted everything, wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake, if Emma would have been better off with a more traditional family. But there were good moments too. Emma's laugh when Marco taught her card tricks he'd learned in his dubious youth. The first time she reached for Lena's hand without being prompted. The night she asked if Sophia could teach her self-defense because she wanted to be strong like her. The slow, fragile building of trust between 3 people who'd all survived loss and were learning to become something that resembled a family. 6 months after Emma came home, Lena woke to find her daughter sitting at the kitchen table with Marco, both of them eating cereal and discussing whether dolphins or sharks would win in a fight. The domesticity of it, the sheer normalcy, made her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. "Morning," Marco said, spotting her. "There's coffee." "And Emma convinced me that dolphins are smarter, so they'd probably win," Lena said, pouring herself a cup and joining them. "See? Lena agrees with me." Emma grinned and Lena marveled at how much easier those smiles came now, how the shadows in her daughter's eyes were slowly fading. Later, after Emma had gone to her room to read, Marco pulled Lena aside. "I need to tell you something. I got a call from Vincent yesterday. There's a group of businessmen, completely legitimate, no criminal connections, who want me to invest in their tech startup. They see me as a respectable businessman now, not as someone to fear." "That's good, isn't it? That's what you wanted." "It is. It means the transition is working. I'm becoming legitimate in the eyes of people who matter." Marco's hand settled on her waist. "But it also means I need to think about the future differently, about what I'm building and who I'm building it for." "Marco, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that this arrangement, this marriage that started as protection and convenience, it's become the most real thing in my life. You and Emma, this family we've accidentally created, it matters more to me than power or money or reputation." His dark eyes searched hers. "I love you, Lena. Completely, irrevocably, in ways that terrify me because I've spent my whole life avoiding exactly this kind of vulnerability. but I don't want to avoid it anymore. Lena's breath caught. You love me? I love you. I love the way you survived everything that tried to break you. I love how you're learning to be Emma's mother, even though you're terrified of failing her. I love that you challenge me and call me on my bullshit and make me want to be better than I am. Marco's voice roughened. I love you, and I want this to be real. Not an arrangement, not a transaction, but an actual marriage built on choice and partnership and whatever messy thing love is. Tears streamed down Lena's face. I love you too. I've been trying not to, trying to protect myself, but I do. I love your darkness and your unexpected gentleness and the way you see me as strong when I feel weak. I love that you didn't run when I told you about Emma, that you've become this incredible father figure to a child you didn't choose. I love you, Marco. He kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of months of restrained desire, and Lena kissed back with everything she had, all the fear and hope and gratitude and love that had been building since the night he'd walked into a diner and seen her when everyone else looked through her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marco rested his forehead against hers. So we're doing this? Making it real? I think we made it real a long time ago. We just finally admitted it. Lena smiled through her tears. Though, fair warning, I come with a 7-year-old who has opinions about everything and doesn't believe in bedtimes. I wouldn't have it any other way. Marco pulled her close. We're a family, Lena. Broken pieces that somehow fit together into something whole. And I'm never letting that go. That evening, they told Emma together. She processed the information with the seriousness of someone far older than her years, then said, Does this mean you're staying together forever? That you won't get divorced like Katie's parents? We're planning to stay together forever, Lena confirmed. But Emma, I need you to understand something. Just because we love each other doesn't mean we're trying to replace your first parents. They loved you in ways that were real and important, and nothing we do changes that. I know, but maybe, Emma's voice was small, maybe I can have 2 sets of parents, the ones who loved me first and the ones who love me now. Is that okay? Lena gathered her daughter into her arms, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and feeling the solid warmth of her small body. That's more than okay. That's perfect. A year later, Marco's transition to legitimacy was complete. He'd sold off the last of his questionable operations, reinvested everything in legal enterprises that were thriving under his strategic management. The people who'd once feared him now respected him, sought his business advice, invited him to legitimate functions where he brought Lena on his arm and Emma when appropriate. Ryan Castellano had never returned, had never broken the agreement Marco had extracted from him. The last Lena heard, he was living in California and had been ordered by a judge to attend anger management classes after another domestic incident. She felt a distant pity for whoever he'd tried to destroy next, but mostly, she felt grateful that she'd escaped, that she'd found the courage to accept Marco's impossible offer. Detective Morrison had been prosecuted for corruption and now worked security at a shopping mall, her career in law enforcement permanently over. The investigation into Marco had closed with no charges, the department too embarrassed by their compromised investigation to pursue it further. Lena had gone back to school, studying business management with the goal of eventually running one of Marco's legitimate enterprises. She had a gift for it. Years of reading people in the diner translated well to understanding market dynamics and customer needs. Marco encouraged her, proud of her intelligence and drive in ways that Ryan had tried to crush. Emma was thriving, still in therapy, still processing her loss, but growing into a remarkable child, smart, compassionate, stronger than she knew. She called Lena Mom now most of the time, though she still kept photos of the Hendersons on her nightstand and talked about them with love and loss that Lena honored rather than competed with. Marco she'd settled on calling by his first name, but the bond between them was deep. He taught her chess and self-defense and the value of keeping your word. They were sitting together one evening, Lena curled against Marco on the couch, Emma sprawled on the floor with her homework spread around her. When Emma looked up and said, I wrote about our family for school. The teacher said I had to write about what makes us special. What did you write? Lena asked. I wrote that we're all people who survived hard things and found each other. That we're not perfect, but we're real. That family isn't just about blood, it's about choosing each other every day. Emma's voice was proud. Mrs. Peterson said it was beautiful and she wants to read it at the parent assembly. Marco's arm tightened around Lena. That is beautiful, Emma. You should be proud. I am. And I wrote that I have the strongest mom and the most protective dad, and together we're basically unstoppable. Emma grinned. Even though I'm still not allowed to call Marco dad until I'm ready. You can call me whatever feels right, Marco said gently. There's no rush, no pressure, though I'd be honored if someday you chose that. Emma considered this seriously, then returned to her homework, and Lena marveled at the ordinary miracle of it. Her daughter doing homework while she and Marco sat together in comfortable silence, just an evening like thousands of others they'd share. Later, after Emma was asleep, Marco and Lena stood at the windows that had witnessed so many of their crucial conversations. The city stretched out below them, full of darkness and light in equal measure. And Lena thought about the woman who'd stumbled through those streets 3 years ago, invisible, afraid, convinced she deserved nothing better than survival. What are you thinking about? Marco asked, his hand finding hers automatically now, a gesture as natural as breathing. About how far I've come. About how terrified I was the night you walked into that diner and saw me, when everyone else looked through me. Lena turned to face him. You told me once that I'd discover whether I had teeth or whether I'd die. I found my teeth, Marco. I found my strength. But more than that, I found someone who saw that strength before I did. You always had it. I just gave you the space to use it. Marco pulled her close. We saved each other, Lena. You gave me a reason to become legitimate, to build something that matters beyond power and fear. You gave me a family I never thought I deserved. And you gave me myself back. The version of me that existed before Ryan, before fear, before invisibility became my armor. Lena smiled up at him. We're quite a pair, aren't we? The crime lord and the waitress. The businessman and the entrepreneur, Marco corrected. We've evolved. We have. Lena stretched up to kiss him, soft and sweet. And I think I like who we've become. 5 years later, on their 7th wedding anniversary, counting from the courthouse ceremony that had started everything, they renewed their vows in a proper ceremony with Emma as their maid of honor and Sophia as Marco's best woman. Vincent and Maria were there, Jennifer and Sarah Goldman, the team of people who'd helped them build their improbable family. The vows they spoke were nothing like the perfunctory words they'd exchanged in that courthouse. These were promises forged in fire, to continue choosing each other, to honor the darkness they'd survived, to build a future worthy of the second chances they'd been given. I promise to see you, Lena said, tears streaming down her face. To never let you become invisible, to never take for granted the extraordinary courage it took for you to trust me with your heart. I promise to protect you, Marco replied, his voice rough with emotion. Not because you need protection, but because choosing to stand guard over someone you love is the highest honor I know. To be worthy of your strength and your trust and your love every single day. Emma, now 12 and somehow both still her little girl and rapidly becoming her own person, stood beside them with tears in her eyes. When they sealed their vows with a kiss, she threw her arms around both of them in a hug that spoke of all the love and loss and hope that had built their family. Later, at the reception, Maria pulled Lena aside. I told you the first night I met you that I saw a strategic alliance. I was wrong. I saw the beginning of something far more important. You've been good for Marco. For all of us. He's been good for me too. He gave me back my life. Lena looked across the room where Marco was teaching Emma a waltz, both of them laughing when he deliberately stepped on her toes. He gave me everything. No, querida. You gave yourself everything. Marco just held the door open. You're the one who had the courage to walk through it. Maria squeezed her hand. Never forget that. Your strength is your own. As the party continued around them, as Emma danced with Vincent and Marco shared a drink with old associates who'd become legitimate colleagues, Lena thought about the journey that had brought her here. From invisible waitress to wife of a powerful man, from broken survivor to thriving woman building her own legacy, from a mother who'd given up her daughter to a mother who'd reclaimed that relationship and made it beautiful. The road had been terrifying and dangerous and full of moments when she'd been certain she'd made terrible mistakes. But standing in this room full of people who mattered, wearing a dress that cost more than she used to make in 6 months, with a daughter who called her mom, and a husband who looked at her like she hung the stars, Lena knew she'd choose it all over again. She'd spent so long being invisible, convinced that safety lived in shadows and silence. But Marco had taught her a different truth, that being seen could be armor, that protection could come without ownership, that sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the most necessary. The woman once told, "Who would ever marry you?" had become someone no one dared underestimate. The waitress who served coffee in a dying diner now ran her own consulting firm, using her gift for reading people to help Marco's enterprises thrive. The mother who'd given up her daughter had built a family that was messy and complicated and more real than anything she'd imagined possible. Marco found her as the party was winding down, Emma asleep on his shoulder despite being far too old to be carried, but accepting the comfort anyway. "Ready to go home?" "More than ready." Lena touched Emma's hair gently. "Thank you for this. For everything. Thank you for saying yes in that diner 7 years ago. For trusting me when you had no reason to. For becoming the most important person in my life." Marco kissed her forehead. "I love you, Mrs. DeLuca. Today, tomorrow, always." "I love you too." Lena smiled through happy tears. "Let's go home." And they did. The crime lord who'd become legitimate, the waitress who'd become powerful, and the daughter they'd both learned to love. Not a perfect family, but a real one. Not an easy love, but an honest one. Not the life any of them had planned, but exactly the life they'd needed. In the end, Lena had discovered that being chosen was its own kind of salvation. That love didn't have to be soft to be real. That family could be built from broken pieces and still be whole. That the most dangerous man in the city could also be the safest person to trust with your heart. She'd spent 3 years being invisible. She'd spent the last 7 being seen, being valued, being loved exactly as she was, scarred and strong and worthy of protection, not because she was weak, but because someone powerful had chosen to stand beside her instead of over her. And standing in their penthouse that night, watching the city lights dance across the windows while Marco put Emma to bed and then returned to pull Lena into his arms, she understood the final truth she'd been searching for all along. She hadn't been saved. She'd been given the tools and the space and the protection she needed to save herself. And in doing so, she'd saved Marco right back. From isolation, from becoming the monster his empire demanded, from losing the last fragments of his humanity to the darkness of his world. They'd saved each other and built something beautiful from the ruins, and learned that sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the only one worth making. This was her life now, her family, her love, her choice. And finally, after so many years of fear and doubt and invisibility, Lena Hart DeLuca knew exactly who she was, a woman who'd survived everything meant to destroy her, and discovered she was worth choosing, worth protecting, worth loving. Not despite her scars, but because of them. Not in spite of her past, but strengthened by it. Not as someone's possession, but as someone's equal partner in building a future neither of them had imagined possible. She was extraordinary, just as Marco had always said. She just needed to survive long enough to believe it.